Guys, we got to talk about Final Fantasy XIV. We got to talk about Wesk Alber. As somebody that is a casual player of 14 from the standpoint of the skill level and the difficulty of the content I've cleared, while I am more than capable of telling new people and stuff a lot about the game because I'm an expert as far as the breadth of the game, I don't have the depth of somebody like Wesk Alber. Somebody who can actually teach me how to play, not just to get started, not just what I need to do to know more than when I first downloaded the free trial. I'm more than capable of telling a brand new player the basics of what makes Warrior versus Paladin versus Dark Knight versus Gunbreaker what they are. But if I want to go into Savage content, if I want to go into extreme content, I need resources of people that are well ahead of me. People like Main Tank, Sphia, Desperius, and West Alber. And I know that when we get to talking about the top level, places like the Balanced Discord, where there is a much bigger discourse and conversation going on, websites like saltedxiv.com, which kind of acts as our icy veins for WoW players. I know there is a debate about whether or not any and everybody who chooses to be operating in that space is a valid contributor because they have views on meta or they have views on top level rotations or stat priority that mathematically are 5% off. But compared to where I'm at, I am unbelievably appreciative of anybody that tries to come in and span the gap from somebody who says, I've read my tooltips and I think I'm doing it right, but I want to be better. And so I'm excited today to do my first Wesk Alber reaction on this channel. Let's get started.
So a month ago, I asked you all, what roles do you play? Very few of you say you only play one role. Most of you play two roles, mostly involving DPS in some way. Likely due to the fear of other roles, due to comfort, or due to different definitions of what you count as playing that role. To which, I should have specified my own definition of what I was asking for, so let me do that now. You play a role if you play it at all. Leveling a job to 80, even if just for the Amaro, you play that role. Dungeons are like 90% of the content most of us do anyway, so grinding up is plenty enough to consider you play it.
This is a mentality that continually shocks me from some of the top respected people in the game. When I hang out in a Main Tank or Sphia stream, and when I hang out, I actually, when I was leveling through Zadnor for the first time, I ended up in Wesk Alber's group, and I don't know that they, I mean, my character's name is Jane Doe, so I don't even know that they knew who I was. But I said I was so excited and thankful for their content. When I interact with these people, the one thing I see in common among people who are truly among the top is this respect for people's place in their journey, is this respect for people that are just doing their best. There is this idea at the end of a pull in a world progression guild that is not who messed it up, who killed us, who do we have to kick to get this clear, and is a lot more of, okay, we wiped, there was a series of events that led to that, let's talk about that, and let me also look at myself and see, is there anything I could have done to make the pull better? Is there anything I could have done with my rotation or my positioning that could have made me have more success or could have made it easier for the other people in my party to have success? And so it continually takes me back. It continually humbles me when people who are playing substantially above me say, if you're just playing this game, you're playing the game. You count. You're not, you know, so Wesk Alber, who puts out tons of DPS guides and all these things as far as like at being an expert on playing your role and is considered an expert on being good at the game. I think that it's humbling to be reminded that while when I say, how do I play this game better, I have to come here and learn, that it's a reminder that people of his caliber do not view me as not already playing the game.
Especially because the journey to level 80 isn't that short. Or 90 come Endwalker. So consider what answer you gave, what answer I consider it is, and then consider the following. All three is the answer everyone should aim to give. DPS, healer, and tank. You should play all three. I'm glad so many of you do. The benefits of even just getting one job of that role to level cap can massively improve your abilities for the other roles.
That's something I'm really thankful for the move into full-time. Historically, I've always liked playing a lot of games, and I haven't always had a lot of time. I mean, there's content I missed in 14 during Stormblood because I just didn't have time. I was working in a job where I worked anywhere from 60 to 90 hours a week. I was working anywhere from 6 to all 7 days a week, and it took a lot out of me. And so when at the same time my wife and I were buying our first house, when we were, trying to have some semblance of a life, 14 didn't always get a priority, much less the fact that I do want to play other games. And so historically in MMOs, when people ask me, how do you have time for multiple MMOs? A lot of it has been that I set what I want to do in the game at a very doable standard. And so I typically only play one job in MMOs to cap, because one class, whatever you want to call it, profession, whatever the game calls them. And because what I found is that if I have time for a second one, rather than play the same game in a slightly different way to get a new perspective, I would rather, with my limited resource of time, play a new game so that not only is the role that I'm doing different, but everything's different. The dungeons are new, the questing is new, the world is new, and so it's an opportunity for me to get a whole new perspective, not just a slightly different one. And I will say there is something deeper about the fact that I am now leveling jobs across all three roles, that I'm now leveling DPS, tanks, and healers, and it makes me enjoy tank differently. I'm not saying better. If you only have time for one, I get it. It is not better, but it is deeper.
Have you ever thought as a tank that things were dying too slow, or the healer wasn't using their kit to keep you alive? As a healer thought the tank was taking too much damage or the DPS were avoiding your AoEs? As a DPS thinking the tank needs to stop moving for your DPS purposes, or healer not healing you? The causes of these issues and the answers to your questions are extremely enlightening. They will make you a better player within your preferred roles, whether you realize it or not. Knowing how to play a tank and healer, even at the surface level, can massively increase your DPS knowledge. You might not expect this, but there are things you can only really notice when playing that other role and seeing how your allies act. Sometimes you may think the tank is just randomly spinning an enemy or boss, but maybe they're avoiding AoEs you couldn't even see because the boss is so big. Or maybe they are just randomly spinning the boss. You don't know. You're just a DPS too busy with your rotation to know what is actually going on with the tank. Knowing why a tank is moving the way they are, assuming they know how to move themselves to begin with, you can adjust your own movement as a melee DPS to spin the boss as needed, or as a range to move to specific positions that you need to be in.
I think I also am better at tanking because I've leveled all 4 tanks now. I think I'm better at understanding what the usefulness of various role-based defensives are, because now I see the way they integrate with all 4 rotations. I think I'm more aware of what a tank is supposed to be as a general concept, because I can separate out what a tank is from what a warrior uniquely is, what a paladin uniquely is, and so on. So yeah, I definitely agree with this. Not only am I better at knowing what to look for when I'm stressing a healer out as a tank, because I've now healed and seen a tank do stuff where I'm like, I can't keep up because I'm not good at this job, and it stresses me out because I know if the roles were reversed, likely that player's better at healing than me and we'd be fine, and it's me that's struggling to keep up. And now as a tank, I'm like, okay, like maybe this healer's struggling to keep up. And sometimes it's because I've just had a long day, I'm just off. Sometimes it's because I'm interacting with chat, so maybe that person has another distraction in their life. And sometimes it's because I'm just on a job that I don't know what I'm doing. And so I think it has, if nothing else, made me more empathetic than where they're at.
Little things like this you can only realize when seeing the other viewpoints. But not everything is as tiny as positionals. Healers have the biggest bits to learn, I would say. Ranged and mage DPS especially need to learn healers. These players are almost always the ones to be super far away from the boss when they shouldn't be. So far, they can't be healed without multiple dedicated single target heals, while the rest of the party didn't need babying.
Yeah, when Preach Gaming did his reaction to Titania EX, he asked about the healing. He asked about, are they targeting people? Is it mouse over? What am I missing here? Is it smart healing of some kind? As a healer, I can tell you that when things start to get hairy, there's a lot of times that like AoE healing is incredibly effective in this game, in my opinion, especially in casual content. It feels incredibly effective to allow me to quickly get back to DPSing, which is something as a healer that I find makes it really fun for me. And when players are really spread out, I can't do that. So a lot of times people stand spread out because they're like, well, if that person gets targeted by something, I don't want to have to move. But they're not aware that while that is a pro, it comes with cons, because those cons just aren't their problem.
Standing a mile away is not as helpful as you think it is most of the time. There are other cases where it does help, but in general, it's not helpful. Try and get at least close enough to get AoE heals, but you'll only really get it once you've experienced it for yourself. Experienced healing the entire party up with a single well-placed AoE heal, and then there's this one guy off in the corner sitting at 10% health because they never left that corner for the entire fight and missed every single heal. Now you have to dedicatedly heal them, or they'll die, and yell at you for not getting heals, despite it being entirely 100% their own fault. This is a bit more significant of a thing to learn than just missing a few positionals, isn't it? It goes deeper than this still, but the point is less about listing out all the possible things to learn, all the little things, all the big things, and more about learning by experience.
I think it's also important that he notes it as it's leveling. When you get into leveling roulettes, it's really nice to know why certain dungeons are hard on certain classes. Especially the sub 50 dungeons, like Stone Vigil. Sometimes you have a healer pop all these cooldowns, and like as an Astro, sometimes I really feel when I'm in low level content, I really feel my hands are pretty tied. Sometimes I feel on particular jobs, it requires such a mastery of that job to operate sub 50 when they're pulling hard, especially if the tank's not using cooldowns. If they're just not using them at all, as a healer, it can be incredibly hard to keep up in some of the tougher tuned sub 50 dungeons, because in this game you actually lose access to skills when you sink down. And so it really struggles with the way it's synced down, and it puts a lot of pressure on them. And the tank's like, well, I'm a level 80 tank, I tank Savage, I'm going to come in here, it's just dungeons, I don't even need to use cooldowns, I'm going to pull hard, keep up. I don't think I can. And then they pull hard and I say, sorry, I'm really new at this job, and like, could you slow down a little? And so they pull one, and then they pull one, and then they pull hard again. That's like, we're gonna die again, especially if there's also a DPS spreading out and doing their own thing. Now, you're just really putting me in a hard spot. And all of the pressure seems to shift to one player.
You can watch and read as many guides as you want, but there's always some stuff you can't really learn properly without real experience. Doing something in itself is learning. Even if you are a person to learn better with videos or reading a guide, it's not until you apply that knowledge that you can really say you learned. The real roadblock here, though, is the fact that you all probably avoid the other roles out of fear of some kind of healers have so much responsibility, tanks have so much responsibility, as if DPS don't. People overestimate how much responsibility tanks and healers actually have. Tank leads the group. Aggro is so extremely easy to maintain, and by high levels you have so many cooldowns, you can basically spam them at random and still have some for the next pull. Healers are similar. In all trash packs, you have tons of cooldowns to keep the tank alive, and still even fit in some DPS. The fact that the greater community as a whole insists a healer should DPS first, heal second, isn't just some elitist grade or anything like that. It's truly because healing isn't as difficult as people on the outside make it out to be. It can be daunting before you know what's going on as a healer, before you get your feet wet.
It's also really hard to practice. The game, the way it's structured now, does a very poor job as you level, giving you an opportunity as a DPS to practice AoE pulls, as a tank to practice using mitigation, and as a healer learning to heal. The difference is with DPS is single target DPSing versus AoE DPSing simply slows a dungeon or raid down. It doesn't necessarily make it impossible to get the clear. A tank not using cooldowns can still just blame the healer. It's not their problem, and it's not that hard to learn to use cooldowns because you do have so many, especially like, I feel like as Gunbreaker, I can just pick any 2 at random and I can survive anything, and I can just use them 2 at a time, 2 at a time, 2 at a time, 2 at a time, and by the time I get around, these have already come off. And so I think for healers, you've spent your time single target DPSing all the way through MSQ, other than when you occasionally get to do each dungeon one time. And so it is a very possible outcome that somebody makes it all the way to cap and hasn't really learned to use their full kit. It's absolutely possible. The game just doesn't offer that. It's something I really hoped RollQuest would lean better into. I think they did get to tell more epic stories than JobQuest did, but I was really hoping by them being targeted at a specific role, and they kind of started to, like the tank one, felt like I got to tank a little bit. What I think I wished is that there was maybe like a savage version of those, or an extreme version of those, where I could kind of scale it up, and I could treat it as a more advanced form of Hall of the Novice, where I could, in a trust-type format, learn to do these things, and maybe have a bit of a feedback screen at the end that said, hey, this is the ability that killed you. Did you know that Rampart and Reprisal were both off cooldown? Just saying. That's the sort of thing that could probably help. And then you could go back and you could try again. Because as it is right now, you get thrown in with other players, and because they're random players, you have no idea how they're going to treat you. You want to be respectful of their time, you want to be a good member of the community, and it's easy to be nervous, especially with healing or tanking, because unlike DPS, doing your job poorly, while there is a lot to learn between a poor DPS and an expert DPS, it is not about just slowing the content down. You are literally wiping the group.
But once you actually get into it, you start DPSing more than you start healing. Bosses are where any amount of real healing will be needed, and there's always plenty of room to use cooldown heals and other such skills. The issue comes in when people take avoidable damage, which is on them and not you. Sure, you could fail to save them when you otherwise should have been able to save them, and should improve yourself to fix that, but the responsibility falls on the DPS who failed to dodge. Which, that's another reason for DPS and tanks to play healers, I suppose. How many times have you unfairly blamed the healer for your own mistakes? That you stood in something easy to avoid, and then died because you took another hit after. Maybe that hit avoidable too, but you blame the healer instead for your death. When you're on the receiving end of that for the first time, it clicks just how wrong it is to blame the healer for deaths as much as it might happen.
That's my favorite part of Delibrum, is that if you get hit by 2 things, it's not the healer's fault, there's nothing they could have done, you're gonna die.
But it's just as easy also to yell at the DPS for their mistakes. They need to keep up uptime on the boss, keeping their rotation up, not stopping their damage, while also still avoiding taking damage. They can't be taking constant hits like the tank might be able to. They can't keep themselves alive like a healer who takes a hit can just heal themselves up in time. The healer needs to watch you, but they're busy dealing with the normal fight rotation and trying to keep the tank alive from tank busters and such. The responsibility of DPS is high damage, and to make the lives of the tank and healer easier. The better you do as a DPS, the easier it is on the healer and tank. The higher the DPS output you have, the safer some giant pool is, the safer a boss is, because the faster stuff dies, the less cooldowns, the less danger there is. Arguably, that's the biggest responsibility. You have the biggest bulk of damage and the biggest bulk of minimizing the dangers of anything else the tank and healer might try. And this becomes only more obvious when you go from having high DPS in a party to having lower DPS. Play a healer or a tank and get the slow runs, and you see it's not just about the speed of the
It's really nice to see him randomly open up a menu because like hunting log like that because he's clicking so fast.
run. It's about how safe the run is. And on top of all of this, unless you're taking Gunbreaker or Sage, you're starting from level 30 or even lower at level 1. You have easy content to practice in, a very safe environment to get going before you fully realize what all is going on within a role. Then once you've started to get going, the anxiety is already gone because you realize a lot of it is way easier than you ever expected. You can learn stuff for other roles while playing that role you thought was impossible or was too intimidating. You can take it slow, but you really should take the journey. All 3 roles will benefit you far more than you realize. This is probably the shortest video I will make, potentially ever, but that's how important it is you step out of your comfort zone even a little. You don't need to constantly play them, do difficult trials or even extremes with all roles, but you should make the leap into other roles to at least level them up in dungeons. You may even discover something you never knew you'd enjoy so much and end up changing your main role as a result. A new part of yourself and your life in Eorzea.
That's been a big part of why I've gotten into tanking, is the community invited me to try tanking and I never looked back.
As I said, this was very, very short, but this is a topic that people need to hear. You can start at level 1, slowly get over the anxiety these easier to play than DPS roles are, and improve. Plus, hiding away from the easy roles like tank won't teach you anything and maybe lose you tons of fun as a result. Just because you think you won't like tanking doesn't mean you actually will. I know several people who always thought they would never ever be a tank and end up love tanking now. But take care, and may the power of Anna Nidhogg lay waste to your enemies.
Yeah, I do think that, for me, like, I wouldn't have discovered tanking had I not been encouraged to try it. And now I love it, and it's my go-to. Even when I went back to playing WoW alongside 14, it was part of that. So I think for me, that's a big portion of that journey. For me, that's a huge part of kind of getting a deeper appreciation for the game. It doesn't mean you have to change jobs. It doesn't mean you will, but I do appreciate that trying more of the game allows for a wider love. It's one of the reasons that I'm so adamant about encouraging people to try everything that 14 and WoW have to offer, because when you're frustrated at one part of the cycle, say you're frustrated about the current state of Shadowlands. Okay, well, when did you start playing? Well, Shadowlands is my first expansion. Well, have you gone back and tried a lot of the other content? You know, hey, I feel like I'm pretty caught up in Final Fantasy 14. Well, have you tried other jobs? Have you, especially as we look to Endwalker, where there are going to be jobs that get changes, what if your job changes in a way that makes you like it a little less? It'd be really great if you had another job waiting that you already were like, hey, this is kind of neat. Maybe it gets changed into a way where you like it more and you switch mains for that expansion. So I think that going and enjoying these games for how wide they really are, you don't have to like everything you try. Maybe you go to Golden Saucer and you love Chocobo Racing, but not Lords of Verminion. That's okay. But the only way you know is if you try them. And I definitely think that it's worth giving something a shot. You don't have to do it till you're good at it. You just have to do it enough that you know whether or not it's worth continuing. So it's great to hear such a level-headed approach. It's always what I expect from the people who are truly at the top, and yet it's always a shocking reminder of how level-headed and how welcoming and good at encouraging people to take that journey. People who are truly at the top of their game are. When I watch people who are some of the best players in Final Fantasy XIV, I have had by far the majority of them have been the exact same way. And when you say I'm thinking about trying Savage for my first time, they're just excited for you. They're not. They're not at all saying like, "Well, you'll never catch me," or "Oh gosh, one more person to drag through as a brand new Savage player." They're continually excited. They're continually welcoming to people who very may well be in their next party finder group, and maybe the reason they don't get a clear in the first, second, or even 10th pull. And they don't mind. Many of them in the 14 community specifically, I see streaming pickup groups. I see regularly people like Frosty, people like Llama Todd, Rin, Comey. I mean, the list goes on and on. People who are willing to switch roles, to fill out a party, and to go in and help people get their very first clears. It's what makes tackling that level of play feel achievable. That you're not doing it alone. Maybe they went alone before you, but you don't have to be alone. There's a ton of support. And even like you said, if you just end up trying the other job only to realize that you like your other job more, well, now you know I don't just like it because it's the only one I've tried. No, I tried others and I came back to this. And it's exciting to be reminded that like you don't have to be best at the game. You can just be somebody who enjoys playing it, and you're still playing the same game. Definitely, not kinda, definitely.